Hey everybody, this is Perch, and I want to give this topic proper consideration because it's kind of hard to explain. I think it gets a lot of knee-jerk reactions from people who, it's a put it this way, it's a more complicated topic than I'm going to be able to do it justice here in 10 minutes or so. But I would just ask that you attempt to at least refrain from the you're an idiot uh, kind of comments and really look at it because I'm asking a question that it's a big question, and it's one that is not just about comics. It's also about movies, cartoons, arguably manga, anime. Understand that Japan is also wrestling with this. We'll talk about that. And actually wrestling as a topic. And it basically goes like this. What happens when you have something, when you have a property, and it's aimed at a certain age group, okay? Like, teenagers or kids. Like maybe you heard my daughter doing the reviews, and she likes The Hunger Games and Maze Runner and Divergent. And there will come a point when she gets a little older, and I show her Battle Royale, and she'll appreciate that. But she's a little young for Battle Royale at this point. I think that's coming in a little young. I'm not ready to fully traumatize her. She really wants to go see that Megan movie, which just looks like absolute shit. Now, maybe one of you could tell me it's secretly amazing, but in terms of this is a weird thing to think about. When you're thinking about your daughter's first horror movie, I'd like to be something truly, horror. I don't want it to be Megan, but maybe that's me being a snob. I don't. Anyway, but when you have something that's made for a certain age group, like Hunger Games. The Hunger Games is targeted at YA, that the young adult teen kind of market. So what happens if you put that movie out and it turns out the audience that likes it the most, the one that's really into it, is in their 40s and 50s? What do? There's a really good example of this that there's a couple of papers that are put out there about Niantic. Now, Niantic is a game company, and they came out with a little game called Pokemon Go. And Pokemon Go, when it was created, was targeted at teens. That's the demographic they were going after. They very clearly stated that. That was what they believed. That's what they wanted. What they discovered, however, is that Pokemon Go caught on more at an older audience, 30 to 50. And even in some cases, older than that, people who were retired. But 30 to 50 became the primary demographic of Pokemon Go, not the one they were aiming for, not the kids. So what did Niantic do? Well, they suddenly, over the last couple of years, they started changing their features, how they would release Pokemon, how would they put them out, how they tie them to microtransactions within the app, all this kind of stuff. They made significant changes to Pokemon Go. And, that title has survived quite well in, generally these games as they've come out, kind of the popularity, a lot of the tracking, things they've done, data that's gone into it, etc. They pivoted. They basically said, we didn't get the market we were after, but we got a good market. So let's make the changes we need to make and take the money. And that's what they did. There's a whole case study around this, and it's actually very fascinating. If you really get into it, it's really interesting to see kind of this market, because in comics, there's a little bit of but comics aren't meant for you behavior. And what I mean by that, and this is where, this is where I'm going to do a poor job describing it, because people are going to have this gut reaction. But I'm not saying this is a big attack or a big, you got to go fight these people or anything like that. I'm saying it from the perspective of, there is a belief that comic books are aimed for a younger audience. And then a number of things happen. Alan Moore comes in and does, dark stuff, Frank Miller, others. The collector's market took over. People started making comics more for speculators and collectors and then readers, and all these different things happened. But what occurred is comics got the audience they didn't want. Basically, the people who grew up with comics stayed with comics, and the new audience that was supposed to be younger didn't didn't show up. They went to other things. And so as a result, comic books, which are meant, this is the logic. I don't agree with this logic, but this is the logic. And I don't think this logic that I'm about to tell you is so outlandishly crazy that we just need to, shit on it. I think there's basis behind this logic. It just, life sometimes gives you not what you expect. So the logic goes, comic books were made for kids. The current readers and the people who are involved in comics, a lot of the people who are currently frustrated with comics, are basically, they're the wrong audience. They're not supposed to be there. They should have gone on, done something else, not kept collecting comics. And as a result, the publishers, comics market, is left trying to cater to the wrong people who again, shouldn't be there. So what do you do? Do you forcibly get rid of them? I think comics and sub-publishers have tried to do just that. They actually have, taken steps to really try and isolate themselves from the audience they have. I think that they've attempted at different times to reach out to the new audience, to the younger audience, but they don't have the right bait on the hook. And also, to pivot audiences like that, you would have to have a severe reckoning of your revenue. Money would have to go down a lot in the transition path to get to that new audience. So it creates a reasonable problem for comics that they're stuck in this mode. Well, I bring up that Pokemon Go example because, a number of successful companies have, aimed at one market and then basically, shifted course and said, you know what, I mean, we didn't get the market we want, but we're getting we got something we think maybe even better. So fuck it. We're not, we're gonna change course. That's what I think, that's what comics need to do at this moment. They do need to basically change course. When I say change course, I mean, start appealing to the audience they have. Stop, clinging on to this idea, this business model that's proving to just not be viable. Because that's kind of the problem. That in a nutshell, fair or unfair, the comics market, with all of the parts that are at times frustrating, speculators and appealing to collectors, and and having to deal with people who are 30-year people who are reading and consuming the product, who are far older and have consumed and read far more of it than the people creating it. That's tough. But it is what it is. Look, I mean, Disney famously went through this process where the theme park is made for kids, but the kids loved it so much and became adults, and then started to that became the best marketing for Disney. Far better than what Disney themselves could do. There's a period in the both the 90s, but definitely in 2007, 2008, where Disney came to the conclusion that the parents, basically the people who once loved Disney as kids, were the best, just way more effective than they could ever be in terms of promoting Disney. And so they changed. They, instead of marketing as much to kids, they marketed to the adults. They basically did. That's why, and you've seen them. They did a number of ads that were along the lines of, remember when you were a kid? Remember when you used to love Disney? Do you remember those great memories you had with your parents? Well, now you've got kids, and you want to take them to Disney. That's the change they made, and it was smart. It carried them through a good, 15 years of, great business growth. Bob Iger got a really nice check. A bunch of these guys made their names. But it started with the realization that, promoting Disney to kids, because if you go back to the 70s and the 80s, Disney used to market to kids. They knew that mom was paying the bill, but hell, Disney did a huge, and I mean huge, tech investment in their park. And a big part of that investment that they did was to make it easier for mom. Now, let me explain that a little bit. The booking, they had a bunch of analysis. They hired consultants, spent a bunch of money there, and they came to the conclusion, a correct conclusion, that one of the most stressful parts of a Disney vacation was not standing in line and not, riding the roller coasters or any of that stuff. It was planning the trip. That, booking the trip, buying the tickets, making sure, you're staying at the right hotel, all that other shit was so stressful and so painful for parents that the parents were starting to opt out of going to Disney in the first place because they didn't have the time. They didn't have the time, the internet, like they just, people are busy and they're like, it's too much of a headache. I'm having to spend all this money and mom is stressed out of her fucking mind trying to get this vacation. So they said, you know what? Let's move some of our spend and our marketing and our money from the kids to mom. Let's start promoting it to the person who actually has the money, who's funding us. It was a very smart decision. And it worked. And now, again, Disney is sitting there basically allowing the parents, the people who are the believers, the people who, love Disney and love that brand and love that property and everything else, they're allowing them to be the primary vehicle for getting their kids in. It's also the danger for Disney because as parents, now this next generation's coming up that does not have the same attachment, or, Disney wandering into the political debate and whatever, is going on with Twitter, that's poison to that same idea. You're basically getting the adults to not promote the park to the kids. And, Disney's happily lived for 20 years now of letting somebody else be the primary driver of excitement for the park. But anyway, so when it comes to comics, there is this idea that keeps coming up that I've heard, many times of saying, well, the problem is the people who are buying the comics today are not the people who should be buying comics. And, the reality of that statement is, look, whoever's giving you the money is your audience. Love it or hate it. That's who you got to deal with. So, the smart thing to do is to pivot. And I think you start asking yourself some very different questions. One question that I think, if you're at the big two right now, or even an indie, whoever, I think one of the questions that you should be asking, hopefully internally, is how do we get mom and dad to promote the comics to their kids? How do we get dad buying comics because it creates a good nostalgic memory of themselves buying comics? How do we do that? And do we need to provide some extra incentives to the parents to get them to say, hey, do you remember when you were a kid and, you had Secret Wars? Remember that? And there's like the character with the shield and all that kind of dumb shit. Remember all that? Remember the first time you saw Spider-Man in his black costume? Do you remember that kind of cool moment? Wouldn't you like your kids to have that cool moment? Play on nostalgia, but it's not just pure nostalgia. You're not playing directly to the adults. You're playing to the adults to market to the kids. And that is like Pokemon Go. They changed their business strategy. I think that right now the comic companies are kind of clinging on to this idea that, they still want the audience they want, which again, from a logic perspective is not wrong. So I said at the beginning, I know a number of you are probably like, well, fuck these guys, but and if you're somebody who's older and has been collecting comics, I'm sure it sounds shitty, but the reality is it does make sense. Logically, it makes sense. Comics began with the YA younger kid audience for a very long time. It makes sense that you would want to start there. It makes sense that that's the origin point. All that stuff makes sense, except it's not true. Except that's not the market that exists. It's not who showed up to the party. So therefore, even though things make logic, a pivot is needed. And that's kind of where we are today. Anyway, curious to get your thoughts on this in the comments below. It's a tough subject, but it's a legitimate one. It is what is happening. So let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and thanks for listening.